How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Questions Are Answers, and this one is episode 5. And today we're going to be talking about how to overcome limiting beliefs and prevent new ones from being created. And the second part is actually really important because a lot of times we will overcome a lot of our own limiting beliefs, but then new ones tend to pop up and we still feel like we're in the same spot. And that might not be the case for you, but it was the case for me, and this most likely the case for quite a bit of people. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. And what I wanted to preface the episode with is to kind of like lay down the foundation to breaking down what limiting beliefs are so that we can understand the true nature of it. And when we understand that and what it is, it makes it a lot easier to then overcome. And at the end, you'll kind of realize that there's really nothing to overcome. And so we'll just dive right into it. So what are limiting beliefs? Limiting beliefs are thoughts that we have that prevent us from being able to do what we want in life. And it's thoughts that are very restricting, very limiting, thus limiting beliefs. And it kind of causes a lot of friction, and it gives us a way out for a reason of why we're not doing something that we actually want to do with our lives. So with that, the key here is that they are thoughts, and that's the core essence of it. And when I came to see what they actually were, it kind of dissolved and like disappeared for me. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. The way that I see limiting beliefs now is that it's created out of our own thinking, and it actually doesn't come from us. This is one of the biggest epiphanies that I've had. Your limiting beliefs did not come from you. When you came into this world as a baby, like a beautiful baby, did you have any limiting beliefs? No. So limiting beliefs are something that we learned and were passed on to us, and not something that we were innately born with, and not something that we inherently had when we came into this world. And that's really good news, because that means that we can return it to wherever it came from. And when we really dive into it, and I started thinking about this quite a bit, and I just realized that limiting beliefs didn't come from me. It usually came from somebody else, and they were somebody else's thoughts or thinking or programming, and it was passed on to me. For example, most of my life, I believe that I didn't have enough money to do what I really wanted in life. And that was passed on to me from my parents, because when I grew up, I believe I talked about this in a previous episode, they always said, hey, we can't do this because we don't have the money. And that stuck with me. And so I just believed that we never had the money. So I stopped asking for things. I stopped dreaming about things. I stopped wanting to do a lot of things because I knew it would cost money. And those are the beliefs that I had growing up, which is why I didn't do a lot of the things I wanted to do in my life. And when I look at it now, I realize that that limiting belief didn't come from me. It came from my parents. And then I believed that thought. And the limiting belief became mine once I believed that that was a thing that came from me. So that's why when I realized the true nature of it, I could pass it back to my parents or wherever it came from, my friends, my family, whoever else gave me limiting beliefs that I couldn't do this or I can't do that or whatever it is. Generally, it came from somebody else. And then it internalized into me and it came onto me. But the beautiful part is that I technically created that belief, right? The thought came into my mind that I don't have enough money because my parents told me that. And then once I believed it, then that's when it became my own. But the beautiful part about it is that I can unravel it, right? Because I created it technically, and made it my own, I can then discreate it, if that is a word, and unravel it so that it is not me anymore. It's not going to be part of my identity. And that's what I came to see. So as you're looking through your limiting beliefs, look at where they came from, and then realize when you trace it back, you'll realize that it's probably some point in your childhood, and it's probably passed on to somebody or from somebody to you. And that's when you can start to see it for what it is and see that, hey, this thing actually isn't me, even though I've been identifying with it my whole entire life. And now you can begin to disassociate from it and know that this isn't you. And go back to source, come back to your inner self, come back to clarity. And as I began doing that, more and more limiting beliefs began to just dissolve and dissipate before my eyes. And it is so beautiful. And so I want to use this moment to transition to the next topic, which is how can we unravel some of these limiting beliefs? Because now that we see it for what it is, which is it's from something else, then we brought it into our own minds and then believed it so that we created it and made it our own. How can we then, what is like the process to then unravel that and disassociate from it? So another important part to understand about limiting beliefs is kind of what I alluded to before, which is limiting beliefs are created from our own thoughts. And so the nature of it is a thought, and it only has power over us if we do believe in it. As soon as we stop believing that the limiting belief is true, it stops controlling us. It stops restricting us. It basically dissolves before your very eyes. And so one way to be able to begin to disassociate from it and not believe it anymore is to begin questioning it, which I believe I talked about in a previous podcast episode as well. So question the belief and question to see if it's actually true. And as you begin to question things, and this happens with anything in life too, when you begin questioning it, you disassociate from it and you stop believing in it, and it stops having a lot of power over you, because you're essentially zooming out and elevating your consciousness to then exit out of the program that you have in your mind. The only way to not break out of a limiting belief is to not question it and to not essentially step back and take a look at it for what it actually is. It's very hard to stop our thoughts and thinking as we're in it, but when we take a step back, we're able to interrupt the program. And one of the best ways to interrupt our programs is questions. And that's why I love the podcast episode, or the podcast name, which is Questions Are Answers, because they really do lead to epiphanies, answers, insights that truly change our life forever. And so begin to question the limiting beliefs that you have. And because it is a thought, I wanted to go into what that actually means. And so limiting beliefs are all constructed by our own thoughts and thinking. And the nature of thoughts or thinking itself, and those are two, I use those two words and they're not really interchangeable, but I'll kind of go into detail about what they are specifically and how it relates to limiting beliefs. So thoughts are just the raw materials that come into our mind out of thin air, essentially. It's from the universe, right? So from infinite intelligence, it comes into our minds, and that is thought, right? We can use it to create things, to think about the future, or create, just essentially create anything, right? That's how all things are created, really, is from thought. And so thinking, though, is quite different. Thinking is when we begin to think about the thoughts that pop into our head. And that's more of a verb, and thoughts are more of a noun. It just pops into our head. Thinking is like an efforting type of activity. Like it requires effort, it requires energy and willpower to be able to do it. And that's when we do a lot of thinking, we feel quite drained. And that's not necessarily how we can overcome limiting beliefs. And if you start to notice it, the more that we think about something, the worse it tends to get. And that's why when they say it rains, it pours. And so how do we stop this? If we understand the nature of thoughts and then thinking, what we want to kind of stop doing is thinking about the limiting beliefs or thinking about the thoughts that we have. If I have a thought, or if we have a thought that pops into our head that says, I'm not enough, or I don't have the money, that's fine. We might not have the money right now, but when we start attaching ourselves to, I don't have the money because of XYZ, I can't do this because of this, and start continuously thinking about it and running the program, that's when it starts to destroy our lives and really restricts us from being able to do what we want. So with that, if we stop the thinking about the thought, we can essentially cut off all the power that the limiting beliefs have over us. And that's the beautiful part. And when we stop the thinking, we can allow the thoughts then to pass, and we have no attachment. And the Buddha said, attachment is the root of all suffering. And it's only when we're attached to our thoughts that it begins to cause our own suffering. It begins to cause our own sadness or unhappiness or anger or frustration. But if we let the thoughts pass, we're free. And an exercise from before that really helps with this is asking, who would I be without the thought? Without the thought that we don't have enough money, without the thought that we're not enough, without the thought that we're not skilled enough, we don't have the means to be able to do it, we don't have the talent, we're not born with it, whatever it is, who would we be without that thought? And without that thought, what happens is we begin to become free. We fall back onto our true nature and see that we are free, we are happy, we are fulfilled, we are peaceful, we are excited, exuberant, passionate about life. We are filled with joy and fulfillment. And that's the core of how to overcome limiting beliefs, which is to see it as just our attachment and thinking to thoughts that come into our minds. And when that happens, it causes so much suffering in us. But if we can see it for what it is and see that it is just thoughts that come into our mind and that it can pass, and that who we are without those thoughts is our true self, that we are just free, joyful, happy, fulfilled, then all we need to do is allow the thoughts to pass without any thinking about it and without any attachment. And when that happens, that's when miracles occur. That's when the illusion of the limiting beliefs begins to dissolve, begins to fall apart, and we're free, essentially. And that's all we have to do. And that's why in the beginning of the episode I alluded to that when we see it for what it is, we don't actually have to do anything. And if we trust that, and if we fall back onto our true selves, our innate natural being, our essence, the infinite intelligence and universe that's flowing through us at all times, that's when we are truly free from the limiting beliefs. So with that, to recap, in order to overcome limiting beliefs, we have to understand that limiting beliefs are formed when we start to think about our thoughts and become attached to the thoughts that we're having in our minds. As soon as we let go of the thinking and stop thinking about the thoughts, that's when we can break free from those limiting beliefs. And it's honestly as simple as it sounds. And it sounds kind of weird to do. And a lot of people will say, well, what do I do then? Like, how do I just stop thinking? And how do I just stop my mind from just being so cloudy, so unclear, so disorganized, so cluttered with thoughts? And to that, I always tell an analogy that my mentor told me, which is, if I give you a bowl of dirty, cloudy, muddy water, what do you do to make it clear? And a lot of people will say, I'd boil it, or I'd filter it. And if they boil it, it just becomes really hot, boiled, muddy water, and it actually agitates the water a lot more. And that's not quite the solution. What I realized was that if you let the water sit, the water becomes clear on its own. The dirt begins to settle, the mud begins to settle, and naturally the water becomes clear. The nature of water is clear. And this is the same with our minds. The nature of our minds, if we let it sit, is clear. And that's how we came into the world too, right? It always goes back to that. If we look at children, babies, they are the best examples. How did they come into the world? Were their minds cluttered with all these thoughts and limiting beliefs and all these crazy things going on? No, it's just clear. They're not really having that many thoughts. If they are having thoughts, they're not really thinking about the thoughts. They're definitely not thinking about the thoughts. And that's why they're so happy. That's why they're so creative. That's why there's no restrictions. That's why they're so carefree and truly liberated. And so with that, that's how we can essentially clear our minds and not become attached to thoughts and begin to gain a lot of clarity and peace in our lives. And that's the whole purpose of these podcasts, is to help you see a little bit more than you saw before. I'm not really meant to give you anything other than you being able to gain the clarity and insight for yourself. There's nothing I can really give you, but only for you to realize within yourself. And it is a beautiful thing when you are open, receptive, and can really take a step back and look at the true nature of things, such as our thinking, our thoughts, limiting beliefs. I hope you really enjoyed the episode, and please do, if you did enjoy, if you got something out of it, if you got an insight, I would encourage you to leave a review. It really helps the podcast. It really helps other people, to encourage them to be able to listen and to have insights for themselves and to spread the word about it, because this whole podcast really does rely on word of mouth and referrals and reviews. And so if you could leave one, it would mean the world to me, and it would change other people's lives as well. So with that, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you guys on the next one.